but I'll have it available. So why don't we go ahead and get started? We have the honor and privilege of having Walter Katz-Fishman and Jerome Scott. Jerome is from Atlanta, Georgia, and Walter lives in don't tell me. This is what I'm talking about. Maine, right? No, not Maine. Where was it?
Maryland, the other
Maryland, Maryland.
Maryland,
The other. Yeah,
another
and they're
Maryland.
going to introduce themselves today. They're talking about their book that just was released, Motown and the Making of Black Revolutionaries. Did I get the title right?
Working class
Working
revolutionaries.
Class Revolutionaries. Yeah, I got confused because of the ending, the subtitle, the subheading. But it's available at Barbara's Bookstore. Barbara's Bookstore is just at Macy's in the basement, and they'll be happy to sell you a copy there. Go ahead, brother and sister, take it away.
Go ahead, Walter.
You want me to go first, Jerome?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's really good to be here, and hello to everybody. And so I am from New Orleans, Louisiana. I am a daughter of the South, and I grew up during Jim Crow and the white supremacist and class and gender violence, but especially the white supremacist violence of that period. And it sort of politicized me so that by the time I got to graduate school at Wayne State University in Detroit, which was one of the sites of some of the leadership of the League of Revolutionary Black Workers in 1968, you might say revolution was in the air. 68 was an incredible year, and I was caught up in all that motion. And I also learned about Marxism for the first time in my life and became committed to a transformative and a revolutionary process for myself and for the world that I lived in. And I eventually met up with Jerome and the comrades in the mid-'80s, late 70s, mid-'80s. And we'll say a little bit more, but we decided it was really important to tell this story in the words of the League comrades. And so we were working together on this oral history project for 10 years. We started in 2015. The other thing about me is, like Jesus, like Dr. Estrada, I taught at the university level. I taught at Howard University for 50 years before I retired in 2020. So I am always excited to talk to students, and I'm really glad to be here. And I'm going to turn it over to Jerome.
All righty. Hello, everybody. I'm Jerome Scott. I live in Atlanta, Georgia now. I'm originally from Detroit, Michigan, and one of the founding members of the League of Revolutionary Black Workers in Detroit the League was actually formed in 1969. Drum, the Dodge Revolutionary Union movement, started the process in 1968 with a wildcat strike at the Dodge Main Chrysler Corporation there in Hamtramck, Michigan. So, what do you need to know about me? I was an auto worker until I got fired in a wildcat strike in 1973. We'll maybe talk a little bit about that. And then I moved to Atlanta, to Georgia, where originally my grandparents were from. So I moved back home to Georgia. And the thing that I think I want to say about my stay here is that, matter of fact, me and Walda and a few other people were founders of Project South. It's the Institute for the Elimination of Poverty and Genocide here in Atlanta. We concentrate mainly on political education and also movement building and leadership development. So we started that organization in the late 80s, 1986, really. And we've been doing political work together ever since. And I'll pass it back to the doctor.
Oh. You have
That's
questions, Jesus, that you wanted to ask us, or?
Not specifically. I thought maybe if you could read from your book, if you want to go that route, and then we can open it up for questions and answers.
Well, before we read from the book, maybe I should just say a little bit about why we wrote this book. And so we can lay some context for the students, because we really want y'all to ask us questions, because we want to know what's on your mind about this period of time, the 1960s and 70s, and what your interest is. So we had really been talking about the need to write this book about the League of Revolutionary Black Workers for a long time. And the reason that conversation started up is because there were a couple of books written about the League previously to ours, but they were written by people who weren't involved in the process at all. I mean, and as a matter of fact, they were written by people who didn't interview us either because we refused to let them interview us, or they just didn't take the time to try to contact us. But we realized that if the true story of the League of Revolutionary Black was going to be told, it would have to be told by us. And we decided early on that we wanted to do it based on interviews of people who had been a part of the organization or people who had been associated with the organization in one way or another in Detroit and other places. And so we went about the business of gathering people together and doing at least 40 some interviews. And all of those interviews, at least some of those interviews of every one of them is in the book. And one last thing, there's a website, Motown Revolutionaries.org. It not only it has a lot about what's in the book if you go there, but it also has all the interviews, all the video interviews that we did in the process of developing this book that you can go and watch and get more information about whatever topic you read about in the book or individuals that you read about.
So, since Jesus suggested that we do some reading, I am going to read from chapter 1, the very beginning. It's always good to know how we open up the book. And we start with two quotes that come from the interviews. One is from a dear comrade, Marion Kramer, who was married to General Baker, who was one of the real, leaders, both theoretically and politically. And this is her, in her words, saying why we are doing this project. We have all read and heard different analyses by different people in their books where they summarize the history of the League of Revolutionary Black Workers. This time, we want to set a lot of that stuff straight. So that's a little bit what Jerome was saying. And Jerome, there's a terrific quote from you that is one of my favorite quotes. Do you know which one it is?
I will not even guess.
Okay, so I'll start it and you can finish it. How do you become a revolutionary in the 1960s and go through numerous transitions, but remain a revolutionary today? That story being told by the people who lived those decades can be very significant for some of the critical questions I hear.
Mm-hmm.
There's a paragraph that really frames the book, and I think I'd like to just read that for folks that haven't read the book, and then we can get into a little bit more of the discussion. Jerome, does that work?
Yes.
Okay. Over the centuries, revolutionaries and scholars have analyzed the dialectics of class exploitation and racial and gender oppression within capitalist production relations and social reproduction. We entered this intellectual and political conversation about class, race, and revolution in the United States through the voices of the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, sharing our experiences, our consciousness, our vision, and our strategy. This conversation takes on renewed urgency in this historic moment. The world is in transition from an industrial base of production to a digital, robotic, artificial AI base that disrupts all society and forces the reorganization of major institutions. This transformation embodies deepening capitalist crises, the polarization of wealth and poverty, intensifying white supremacy, genocide, patriarchy, and xenophobia, and the ruling class struggle to consolidate fascism. The working class is rising up from below in the interest of humanity and the earth.
All right.
And yeah, so.
That's beautiful. Well, why don't we open it up to questions? If you have questions about the historical time period or the content of the book, and people in chat, if you also have questions, feel free to post them in the chat. Does anybody have questions for our guests? Or maybe even this question of AI, I think is really relevant to young people's lives. Got the microphone. They're thinking.
That's always good.
All right, we got one question. We'll start.
Hi. I wanted to ask, I think mostly I don't know where to start. I'm very excited you guys are here. I wish I brought my sister. She would love this too. I wanted to ask more about like the beginnings of how you all organized and like what that looks like and maybe how that could apply to today.
Okay, I'll start with that question and pass it on to Walda. So the main base of organization of the League of Revolutionary Black Workers were our plant organizations called revolutionary union movements. And the reason it was called revolutionary union movements is because we not only fought against the corporation, in this case, the auto corporations and the steel corporations and the rubber corporations, we also had to have a battle with our union. And so we all, from the very beginning, we were organized from the basis of having to fight a two-front struggle, one against the corporation and one against the union. And by organizing the plants that we worked in, by organizing revolutionary union movements at those plants, we were able to communicate with each other through the plant, through our putting out leaflets. We put out leaflets once a week, trying to make sure that everybody in the plant knew what was going on as much as we could tell throughout the plant. Particularly when incidents happened with somebody getting hurt on the job because of faulty equipment, or some foreman attacking one of our members, because they weren't working fast enough or something. We wanted to make sure that we were able to get that information out to the whole plant. And so that's why we did a flyer every week trying to document what was going on. Now, that was in the plant. We also had a community organization in Detroit, and it was organized by communities. Yeah, big community organizations, welfare rights groups, anti-police brutality groups, and it dealt with issues like that. What was going on in the city? What was happening with, jobs, and were they hiring people from the community? What was happening with low income people, and the fight to really get the community organized as well. And then the third really solid apparatus that we had was a student apparatus, a Black Student Union. And we had those in high schools throughout Detroit, and so, and they were organized, and they had basic units at the high schools that they were able to recruit high school students into. And while I'm talking about the students, one of the main things that they were able to do to help so much was that, once we began to distribute flyers inside the plant, the plant realized that those flyers, spreading that information around, was really critical to us and really something that they wanted to stop. And so they started harassing people, workers who were passing the flyers around. And so the students came forward and said, you know what? We should pass out the flyers. We're not working at that damn plant, and we won't even be able to work for another 10 years. So let us come out and do the distribution of the flyers. And that was one serious, seriously important contributions that the student made. But that's the way we were organized. And that all, you know, in 1968, we had our main, what developed as our main tactical weapon, the wildcat strike, which I'm sure y'all don't know what a wildcat strike is, so I'll tell you. A wildcat strike is when the workers in the plant decide that something had happened, either a health and safety issue or harassment by the management or just some brutal white supremacist shit that had went down in the plant. And we decided that we're gonna shut the plant down. And the workers, once we decided that, we tried to get the word all around the plant and said we're gonna shut it down at a specific time. We didn't ask the union for permission. We didn't ask the company for permission. We just shut it down. And that's a wildcat strike. And I'll stop there and see if people have any questions about that or Walter want to add anything.
Are there any immediate questions? Because I could add a couple of things.
No, go ahead, because she also had a second part to that. And how is the organizing different today? Is that right?
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, let me just say a little bit more. Jerome mentioned the wildcat strikes. And so there are a couple of things around that. One is that, of course, it was mainly the guys who were in the auto plants. And during the wildcat, of course, they weren't working and they were getting no money because the union was not supporting it. So it happened that, you know, the wives, the family of these workers who had just, you know, walked out in the wildcat were concerned, were upset, right? That no money is coming in, and why are their husbands and fathers not working? And so there was a grouping. Women were not in the leadership of the organization, but there was a women's committee, and it was very important. One of the important things that the women's committee did was it met with the wives of the men who had gone out on wildcat to really explain why it was so important, why this wildcat and their husbands not working for however many days it lasted, why that was really important for the struggle against both class exploitation as well as against white supremacy that was prevalent in the union. So I just wanted to lift that up. And we'll get into the gender question, the women question a little bit more later, I hope. And the other thing, Jerome, is I don't know if you wanted to talk about in the early wildcats when it was mainly Black workers who went out, they weren't as successful as the one where you got fired in 73, and just how important that process was of understanding that all the workers, Black, white, the immigrant workers from the Middle East, especially in Mexico, you know, needed to really unite to do that. And another thing about the healthcare, right? Healthcare was one of the key questions of what really motivated these wildcats in the, you know, physical damage to workers' bodies.
So, yeah, I mean, the question was, how is organizing different today? And it's important because the world is really different today than it was back then. And so organizing has got to be different. We can't expect that we could organize in the same way now that we did then and be successful. One of the things that Walter was trying to prompt me to talk about is this, you know, in the early days in 1968, 69, and 70, we had a lot of wildcat strikes. And all of those wildcat strikes were led by and mainly concentrated on Black workers, because we were the League of Revolutionary Black Workers. And whereas we were successful in disrupting the plant and shutting down work for hours and sometimes maybe a whole day, we were never able to uh, have the effect of our wildcat strike more broadly than just that one plant or that one day. So it was they were successful, particularly for us, because this was our main tactic and it definitely got results. I mean, we were able to actually get people hired in the corporation hierarchy. We were able to get uh, you know people on the shop floor hired in union positions, both in the international union as well as get elected as stewards and committee men. So we were able to make some real advances on our program. But the thing that we began to realize is that our lives at that plant wasn't changing. The health and safety conditions were getting worse all the time. Somebody was getting hurt every day in one way or another. And so we began to evaluate in 1971 our work, our 3 years of work, and we began to evaluate how effective we were. And a lot of other things happened too, but I just want to get to this one question of how we organize differently today. And the one thing we realized is that concentrating and organizing Black workers only in a plant was not sufficient to do the kind of stuff to the corporation that we wanted to do. And after some study of Marxism and some other stuff that we studied, we came out the other end of that saying, okay, we have got to organize the working class as it exists in the world. And that's somewhat the play on the title of the book. It was like from the League of Revolutionary Black Workers to organizing becoming working class revolutionaries in Detroit. I mean, that was the journey that the book sort of documents. And so our understanding of organizing today is that you got to organize this class. And our class is a class that has immigrant workers in it. All these immigrants that is under attack today is part of our working class. It has the abundance of women within our working class, and the whole notion of who is part of the working class is getting broader and broader because of the attack that capital is waging on working people in this country. They're pushing everybody down into a position of, you're living from paycheck to paycheck or week to week. And if you really have some resources, it's only going to last you for maybe 2 weeks. And so this whole question of how do we organize today that's different than we started, we got to concentrate on the most active section of the working class first and and use that base of organizing them to expand our organizing to a broader section of the working class and making sure that the working class sections that are in activity have some way to coordinate our work, to work together and to expand our work continuously. So I think that's the most important difference of how we organized originally and how we determined that we needed to organize in our process.
Hmm.
I think the one other thing, and then it'd be good to get more questions, right? The one other thing, and you kind of alluded to it, Jerome, but the importance of political study and political analysis. I could say that, it was, you talked about how when your lives hadn't changed, you went on this study, but that continuous study, because conditions are changing every day, every moment, but especially between 68 and 2025, conditions are vastly different. So that today it's really critical because the world is in this transition, is in this kind of turmoil, so to speak, these crises of what happens when AI takes your job. And the National Guard and ICE and the Border Patrol, come to occupy your city. And so I think just to say, and people may have questions about the critical nature of political education and political analysis of not only the broad social conditions, but of the actual conditions wherever it is that you're in that immediate struggle, right? Whether it's in the street with this invasion of ICE, or whether it's, whether it's in the university, in the college, where things are really happening to criminalize protest. So political education is just an essential. That was one of the big takeaway lessons.
Okay. Other questions or questions in the chat?
I don't think there are any.
Oh, we got one more question.
Good.
Hello, and thank you for your work. Thank you for talking to us today. I have a question about your process, because you mentioned interviewing many people involved in the facts, and I was wondering, what was your feeling toward it? What was your takeaway? What were the challenges of these people involved in all of this? Thank you so much.
Great question.
Yep. You can start.
So I'll start. I read the quotes at the beginning from both Marion Kramer and from Jerome, and it was 2014. That's like a little over 10 years ago, that we said, okay, we started to lose comrades. Comrades were joining the ancestors, they were dying. And in 2014, General Baker, who was one of the real leaders, we lost him. And we realized that we needed we needed to come together to interview all of the comrades who were in the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, who joined in other organizations along the way, up through an organization that we're in today, the League of Revolutionaries for New America. So we got about 5 folk together in the Detroit area, which is where like 90% of all the interviews were in Detroit. And we brainstormed the names of everybody that we could recall, everybody that, we knew. And so we started with this kind of brainstorming and had a team of us who were then contacting folk to say, we're going to be doing interviews in Detroit in the summer of 2015, 2016. And, folk there got folk together. A couple of things. We also brainstorm questions, and the book is organized around the core questions, right? There were certain essential questions we wanted to ask everybody. How did you get involved with the League of Revolutionary Black Workers or other organizations? What was the role? What was the importance of Black workers at that time in the auto plants? What was their sexism in the organization of the League of Revolutionary Black Workers? And, how do you deal with those questions? How did you stay in the movement for so long? And what was the importance of political education? Those turned out to be sort of the 5 key points. And everybody was asked that. We videoed the interviews, and the website has all 40 plus interviews, okay, that we did. And I should say that in the process of the book, we interviewed 5 people who we lost, right, who died in, before the book came out. Nelson Perry and Al Gladdick and Mike Hamlin and Richard Fahum, and I think one other person. So, we got
Waistline, Daryl Mitchell.
Daryl Mitchell, Waistline. How did I forget Daryl? And so it was, it's a really historic document. We had them transcribed. If you want to know all the details, there's a methodology at the end of the book, the appendix, and you can look at it. But we used an online service to get them initially transcribed. And then we did what we call political editing. We cleaned them up to get the
Could I
excerpts.
interject something?
Absolutely.
Early on, right after we made the decision, we had been working with people in different areas around the country, and we knew that we wanted to videotape all the interviews and all that, because originally we were thinking that we might be able to put together a documentary. And so early on, we assembled this grouping of people, met all young folks, all young folks that volunteered to work with us. We had a camera crew that organized other people to help to do the camera work. We had people that helped us to do the interviews, and so it's important. I mean, I wanted to interject that because if you ever embark on one of these path like this, you have got to have a crew initially that's willing to work with you and do the kind of day-to-day work that needs to be done to get something to make this happen.
That's interesting. Did you have interviews that were your favorite that stood out?
Oh yeah. Well, I don't know. The one thing about the interviews that I thought was really interesting for the book is it's the thing that people say all the time. And that is that people can go through the same experience and have a totally different analysis of it than someone that went through that experience right next to them. Because you'll see when you read the book and read some of the analysis of what people, how people remember their experience with the league, there's some very different things. And some people, when they first read it, they would ask us, these are some contradictory things that people are saying. And I said, yeah, that's the difference in how people understood what was happening. But that was the thing that really not, it was really a happy thing that, people would be able to say, no, I understood it this way, and so that made it really, really interesting. And I thought it made it really a part of the interest of this history is to see how different people analyze the same situations differently.
Yeah.
Interesting.
The other thing that I would add is the vast majority of the folk we interviewed, well, everybody was working class, right? And I'd say the majority, Jerome, did not go to college.
Oh yeah, the vast majority.
The vast majority did not go to college, right? They went from high school into the auto plants, which in 68, 69 were expanded, right? I mean, you could just go walk in, get a job, and support a family on it. And the thing that is really important, and it's a big theme in the book, is the development of working class, of proletarian intellectuals. That is, folk who studied Marxist theory and were able to do a deep analysis and had never gone to college, but that education was part of being in the struggle, in the working class struggle across those decades. So I think that that's really important.
Yes.
So that raises, I'm sorry, I'm a huge Mamdani fan. I know it's problematic. You know about this New York candidate who is a democratic socialist. How do you think that's changing the perception of people towards socialism and maybe even Marxism?
Yeah.
Or is it different today?
Well, from when we started organizing in the 1960s and 70s, socialism and communism was a bad word. I mean, socialism and communism, the concepts have been so demonized by the U.S. and world ruling class that it was almost, you had to almost explain to people why you said you were a socialist or a communist. What does that mean? And we fought against it, and political education helped us once people engaged in political education, they begin to realize that the propaganda that we have heard about socialism and communism is just that, propaganda, ruling class propaganda to scare people, to make people believe that if you even talk to a communist, something's going to happen. Something bad is going to happen to you. I think that the concept began to change not only with Mandandi, but also with Sanders. When he first came out, as a democratic socialist, and people began to look at it differently. And democratic socialism is different than Marxist understanding of what socialism is. But the concept of socialism itself, I think, has taken on a whole different aura about it. I mean, there are people talking about themselves as socialists that really hadn't even read anything about socialism, but it's become a popular term in many circles. So the concept, the view of socialism, and in some respects communism, but not as much as socialism. They still try to make this distinction between socialism and communism, although socialism, as it is the step that has to be gone through, the stage of development that has to be gone through in order to get to communism. It's not a destination in and of itself. But yeah, the concept of socialism and the way people approach it and understand it is totally different and a lot better today. We can talk about it very openly without the worry of somebody, saying, damn, you better stay away from them people. So yes, it's very different today than it was when we started the work.
Yeah.
I'm always shocked because students will self-disclose. And I was teaching one section of English 102 like a year and a half ago, and most of the students identified as socialists. I almost fell out of my damn chair. I was like,
Yeah.
what? And it
Yeah.
wasn't even a shallow understanding. Like there was some deep thinking that was happening and good analysis. That's
Mhm.
beautiful. Other
Yep.
questions from the chat or maybe from the audience, maybe about the writing there you got a lot of writers here too, the writing process that they went through,
Yeah.
or I don't know.
Mhm.
Oh, another question. Beautiful. Thank you. Keep them coming.
I am Italian, and my mother used to be involved in the 68 protest over there in Italy. So,
Mhm.
of course, it's totally different setting. And he tells me that the way she would interact in the community was way better when she was at the time than today. So today she feels a lot of disconnection, whereas those times, even though it was very difficult for them, they were feeling that they were together, they have more purpose. So my question would be like, what do you think about that?
So is the question like, are people more disconnected today?
Yeah, and what if they agree with that? If you guys agree with this, the point of view, my mom's point of view, and the fact that back in the days, during these protests, there was more connection, more sense of purpose.
Mhm.
So she's asking if in the past protests that her mother grew up in Italy, that there seemed to be more connection between people and more purpose.
Mhm.
So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I can start.
Okay.
Look, the world is really, really different today than it was then. And in a very concrete sense, your mother is really right. Just think about this. The plant I worked in, Chrysler Detroit Forge, we had 2,000 people working at that plant. And, each building within the plant, everybody got a chance to intermingle with each other because you were working side by side, and when a problem erupted on the line, it didn't just affect you; it affected another 50 people all up and down the line, and y'all would be discussing. And so all that social production that we had then contributed to people's connection. You know, we were responsible for each other, you know, because we worked side by side. That's one aspect of it, the whole huge social nature of work uh, during that during that day of industrialization back in the 60s and 70s. The other thing that I think contributes to that is that something Walter just said a little while ago. You know, I graduated from high school, went into the military, went to Vietnam, came back from Vietnam and went in the plant to work. And I was able to get a job in the plant that I could raise my family on, which meant that I had, you know, you made enough money at one job to raise a family. Now that job was hard and demanding and dangerous and all that, but you only had to do that at one place. Today, most people that are able to make it has to have two or three jobs. And most of those jobs, you're working by yourself or maybe with one or two other people, but you don't have the same kind of work socialization that created the basis for organizing in those situations because you got to know each other so well. You know, so yes, I mean, those are just two examples of why the connections are different. Now, there are other ways where the connection is much greater, you know, particularly on the international understanding of things. I remember when Chiapas, Mexico, you know, made their big splash, and they put it out on the internet, and the whole world knew that Chiapas was up in struggle with the Mexican government and the Mexican ruling class, you know, and that kind of connection, which is really critical because this movement that we're involved with today and this struggle that we're fighting out in every community and every job, it's a worldwide struggle, and we have to be coordinated uh, globally if we're going to even think about being successful. And so you know, on that level, we're more connected. We just have to figure out how to use the internet effectively to aid in our organizing, not to be the sole way of organizing, but it aids in it. So yes, I mean, on the one hand, your mother is right, and on the other hand, the world is different, and it connected us up differently.
So you raised something that's happening globally, and that's, I think it's a growth of fascism that we're seeing in particular pockets. But we're also seeing like the president of Mexico who's more progressive. You know, we're seeing the prime minister in Ireland who's more progressive.
Yep.
I don't know if you can speak to that fascism that's increasing. And hey, let's talk about our country. You know, we're living in a you name it, a fascist state right now. We were talking about the ICE and the National Guard terrorizing communities. That to me is straight up fascism. I don't know what else you call it, you know?
Right. Yeah. Let I'll start and also kind of add a few things from the kind of previous question. So there is no doubt but that we are living in fascism, which is a very violent and very terrorist form of government, right? I think the other thing that separates us is, and Jerome spoke to it, it's the economic struggle for survival is so much more intense today. I mean, people who are unhoused, who need food, or federal workers who just lost, you know, were furloughed. I mean, you would think a federal worker makes enough to live on, but my God, you know, they're laid off for what, a couple weeks with no money, and they can't feed their families. So I think that the economic crisis and also the environmental crisis, and then the violence, are tending to scare people. The economic crisis is really forcing people to figure out how to survive, which takes a lot of time and energy. But I do think we're seeing, and it was especially true around ICE and the Border Patrol, where communities who were not connected before are coming together. I mean, there is this intense sense of community protection and community self-defense. This culture, the culture
Look
She's
like we
freezing up a
lost.
little bit.
Oh,
You,
she's
you
back.
froze up a little bit, Walda.
Oh,
We
okay.
ended with culture, the culture.
The culture of individualism, the culture that really tells us, this is competition, dog eat dog. Don't go protect anybody. Don't do any defense of anybody. This is all about your survival. And we hear that from ruling class forces and on a daily basis. And the other thing today that's different, Jerome spoke to the internet, but social media. I mean, young people are living and really becoming distressed by just sort of this isolation of social media. So we can use it, right? Revolutionaries and organizers can use social media, but we have to be very conscious that we use it for political organizing, for connection, for clarifying, what's the struggle and what's the tactic and what's the strategy, rather than allowing ourselves to use it as an escape that then pulls us away from society altogether.
I just
Ooh, I
want to
feel you,
add one
sister.
thing to the question about fascism. The number one, and we talk about all this in the book too, but the number one thing that I think we got to realize is that the spear of the fascist attack is on the working class.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a war on the working class that is beginning with the immigrant section of the working class, with a hope to divide the rest of the working class away from the immigrants and to allow them to do what they want to the immigrant community, which is only a proving ground for what they intend to do to the rest of the working class. So if you look at what's happening right now in the immigrant community throughout the country, these blatant attacks on various immigrant communities, the attack on a whole apartment building, which we find out months later there in Chicago that no charges of anybody in that apartment building were filed, and it's just an attempt to terrorize the immigrant community in order to terrorize the rest of the working class because we don't come to the defense of the immigrant section of the working class. So, I mean, if you wonder what's happening with fascism, that's what's happening. A blatant war on working class people because they know that the future of capitalism in this country is a future without jobs, is a future without income. And they're trying to figure out a way to control people who are on the edge. And they believe that fascism is the only form of government that can control that. They can't, but they think they can.
That's beautiful. You've helped me because I'm writing an article right now about this, and you helped me gain a lot of clarity. But we have questions in the Zoom. Matthew, go ahead. You can unmic, or if you want to chat your question out, and then Ash, and then Elliot.
Hi. I just have a question. I completely agree with ICE fascism in Chicago, but kind of circling back to the socialist aspect you were talking about. My dad moved here from socialist communist Poland. And after 40 years of socialist communism, the average salary in Poland was $20. That's why he moved here to create a better life. And we have example of countries such as Cuba failing. The Soviet bloc collapsed as well because of state-owned companies. So my question is, how is the future going to be any different when we have examples from history that shows that social communist fails?
I'll start.
Yeah,
I mean, the first thing is we only get taught part of the history. The history of like the example you use with Poland and the amount of salary that someone made after 40 years of socialism. What we don't get is that the moment the Russian Revolution happened and the Soviet Union was established, 18 international countries attacked the Soviet Union and tried to prevent it from establishing socialism. Tried to prevent it from developing its industry. we don't talk about World War II, where, literally millions and millions of Russians, and mainly the Russians who had a better understanding of what socialism and communism was, they were lost in World War II, and half of the country was destroyed. Their entire infrastructure and industrial base was destroyed in World War II, and what it took to try to build all that back. And all of it was done in order to prevent socialism from establishing itself. And so if you look at the history, really, um, even though it was 40 years, it was 40 years of constant attack and constant struggle and constantly trying to protect itself from mainly the United States and the various attacks that it took on. So yes, you can say that the history of socialism has not been what we expected it to be, but I think that's true because um, the number of countries that went to socialism and the kind of response that the capitalist world had on that prevented them from being able to consolidate and really move, in the most positive way that they could. Now, with that all being said, when you look at um, the number of people that were brought out of poverty during the socialist period in the Soviet Union and in China, right now they're talking about China has brought out literally hundreds of millions of people out of poverty because of the way the socialist economy is organized. I think that if we could have a socialist society in a country like the United States, where the industrial base is so powerful, I think in just a few years we'll see significant difference in the living standard of the American people, although the living standard of the American people is already somewhat advanced, but going in the backward direction right now. So I think the history that we hear in the United States is only a partial history, and the ability. I mean, just think about it. Socialism takes away the profit motive from production. It ends up producing things because people need them, and getting things to people not based on how much money they have. That's why you could say in Poland he was making $40 or something. But what did that $40 buy is a whole different question, you know, because the profit motive is not there. You could sell things at the price that they were produced at and benefit workers throughout the country on an immediate basis. So I think looking forward is a whole different view than just looking backward at the history of socialism in this world.
But there's also, I'm sorry, I'm going to jump in real quick. There's also the
Yeah,
question of what technology has to offer for people.
right.
I just think about the abundance that we have in this country. Um, if it wasn't for profit, you could feed the population multiple times over. We could
Yeah.
have a proper healthcare
Exactly.
system,
You could have.
but then even this whole promise of AI, which is
Yep.
hugely problematic. I mean, right now it's polluting the environment, it's taking away jobs, it's not being used for the benefit of the many. You know what I'm saying? But it
Yeah.
holds a kernel that could have potential to help us. I think. But I see
Yeah.
you, son. I got just two more questions and then we'll get to you. Ash has a question. She says, what was it like to co-writing with each other? And then after that, Elliot has a question.
Okay. Go ahead,
Well,
co-writer.
Go ahead, go Ryder. It was a joyful challenge. Okay. Um, we talk a lot. And Jerome mentioned that we've been working together since the 1980s and have been doing writing. So it meant that we had to really collectivize. We had to have deep discussions before we did sections of writing, before we did the project. And then every time we did editing, we had to review it together. So it was real collaborative. It obviously helped that Drum and I have studied together and struggled together, so our worldviews overlap a great deal, though our personal histories and our experiences are really, really different. And I would say it was a learning experience. You know, it was a real learning experience. And you got to really appreciate the different strengths that each of us brought to the process, right? Because we had a clear division of labor, and that was really important.
Mm.
And I don't know if that helps. But the other thing is that we published with an academic publisher, which we were asked to submit, and we did, but we were a little nervous, a little, unsure, because the book is so clearly a book written by communist revolutionaries in 2025 in the United States. And we didn't mince any words in the book about our analysis of fascism, the class war, and where we are, and the lessons from the League. But the academic review process gave us some, good reviews. That was kind of, pissed off when some of the early reviews came in. It's like, what are they saying? How come they don't understand what we're talking about? But it made the book itself better. And so I think that writing is it has an individual side, but for us, it was a very social process and part of a story of revolution in then and now that we really wanted to tell. And so I think we ultimately complemented each other, but there were some hot moments along the way.
That's
A
beautiful.
few.
Oh, that's wonderful. Elliot, do you want to put your question in the chat, or do you want to speak it?
Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, we hear you just fine.
Okay. I visited Detroit over the summer. I think that city, if you're going to tell a story about America just in general, how we found ourselves here, in kind of every aspect, that's the story that needs to be told, is that city. I mean, the probably the most important, part of it is automation, factories, industrial hub, that kind of thing. And it's all ups and downs. And many you definitely know better than I do because you lived it, but globalization was like the nail in the coffin for what people like used to be the richest city on earth, and it just literally the bottom fell out. I want to know, especially within today's era of production and how value is made on a global scale. You know, most of we're in the service economy now. America gets a lot of its, we do have an industrial base, but a lot of our, GDP is generated through services, whether it's, tech or, financial services, advising, these kinds of things. You know, I think this also speaks to kind of the idea of disconnection that we have right now, where, we're not dealing with tangible things we're making. We're just kind of moving around numbers on a screen, and that's how I guess we make money. So I want to know, in today's context, when, people are being trained to, I don't know, become, I'm trying to become an engineer.
Mhm.
Odds are though it would aid me if I were to be a laborer. the work that I'd be doing would mostly be, at a desk. And I'd be making more than the people who would actually be, building the thing or whatever. So I want to kind of hear your thoughts on this, how we truly have gotten to a trickle down kind of thing where people who make not necessarily, they don't literally make stuff, yeah, how we got there. I think the immateriality of what we see as valuable. Yeah. Thank you, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Oh,
That was a really
thank
thoughtful
you for the
question.
question. Yeah. So the first thing I'd say about that is that it was sometime during the 1990s or something like that, where financial investments, financial maneuverings, financial things, where everything was digitalized and up for sale. Well, those interactions, those financial interactions within the capitalist system was making more money, more profit for corporations than their production in. Where production was dominant forever. Producing goods and services in this country was the dominant way of making money, of making a profit, and becoming rich. Well, that's transitioned from production being the biggest way for making money to financialization being the biggest way of making money, is what has sent the capitalist economy really down a drain. It's going further and further down the more people make money off of financialization. And the main reason is that the only way to create new value is through producing new stuff through human activity. Human beings are the only thing that adds new value in the system of capitalism. And so all the financial rigmarole and deals that are being made, they make money for the people that come out on top, but they don't add value to the general economy. And therefore, capitalism has descended into where it is now, where workers can't can't really get a living wage from any one job. As a matter of fact, you could work 2 or 3 and still not make a living wage. That's all because of the way things are being translated now. And then the last thing I'll say is, AI, artificial intelligence. I mean, they are telling us straight up that AI is going to eliminate the vast majority of jobs. Even, I was thinking about this when you were, Elliot, talking about becoming an engineer. I mean, AI is going to replace most of the people that do engineering. Because whatever that down and dirty stuff that needs to be done, you might still be able to do it, but the intellectual work about engineering is all going to be done by AI. And that's true for just about every other job on the planet. So they are expecting AI to do serious damage to the job market in this country. And that's going to affect each and every one of us.
Yeah. If I could just follow up on that. So Jerome talked about it's only workers in production that make new value, right? It's human labor that creates new value, but that value is only realized when that commodity, that thing is sold, right? And that's the marketplace. And so one of the impacts of technology replacing labor is that it also means that labor, that is workers, you and me, we cannot go back into the market to buy the housing, the food, the durable goods, the cars, the clothes that capital used to sell and make a profit from. And so the others, so that's one of the big things. Capitalism really cannot expand anymore, right? I mean, the markets are essentially saturated, and consumers, as a huge, the majority of the market, are being eliminated as real purchasers because we don't have enough money to buy stuff. And that means too, in relation to this financialization thing, that a lot of what is being produced, like I think it's NVIDIA, right? The chip maker. Who are they selling to? They're not selling to consumers. They're selling to other corporations. So you have this interpenetration of corporations selling to other corporations and also draining the treasury, right? I mean, that is the other thing about the $1 trillion military budget. All of that money is the government buying all of these military goods and services and technologies because ordinary working class people can't buy anymore. So the corporations have really captured the government apparatus, not only militarily, but financially. And so I think all of those things are interrelated.
That's great. You have a question from the audience? Thank you for waiting.
Oh, thank you. This isn't necessarily a question, actually. I have, let's say, two comments to make. Just off of your recent note, I would like to point out that capitalism has the last bastion to conquer. There's no space, no land, no other resource that it can take except our conscious mind. That's why social media is so profitable, and that's why AI is ultimately like, let's look at Sora. Like now they're making apps. I actually just saw an ad last night about you can make a recording with your grandmother when she
Mhm.
passes away. The
Mhm.
AI will build on her personality from there so you can keep talking to her.
Mhm.
These are the last stages for late stage capitalism that we're enduring, and that's what's
Mhm.
sending us into like this dystopian cyberpunk-esque land where now we're dealing with people that are going to be talking to AI versions of their dead relatives. You know, like we're dealing with ultra biased AI algorithms. And another thing people don't speak about is how AI algorithms are actually curated from the corporations at the top. They're not on a broad
Right.
information resource. You're letting these ultra rich ruling class individuals tell you what to know, tell you
Right.
what to learn, and tell you what is valuable. That ultimately detracts from education in itself, especially now that the education Department of Education is under attack. But
Mhm.
sorry, that was like one point, and I'm gonna spin back to the socialism thing with Matthew. Um, one thing in America, and let's just keep it 100%, Western countries and Western media, they have a love affair with socialist failures, not the successes. If you look at every Nordic country, even Latin American countries, Cuba, we can go on with Asian countries as well. There are many quiet socialist successes that are, if you look at them today, are that some of the happiest countries. I mean, look at Finland, look at Sweden, look at Denmark. These countries are phenomenal. And now we're looking at China. China has let's been it's been like under the media belt for a long time and has been disgraced by Western media. And now China is a powerhouse because China has sat there and not only um took central planning to the max, they've reinvested so much back into their education, into their communities, into their people. I will say it is quite unfortunate that back in Poland at that time your father had to move. I understand that, but I think you also have to think that at that time socialism is a small part of what makes a country run. It can be an extreme resource, yes. But Poland, let's say 40 years ago, that was post World War II. It was destroyed by Germany. And honestly, Poland doesn't have very many resources to even keep a market maintained. So I will say that is honestly just an unsatisfied circumstance of World War II that was never rectified. And that is something that like our past predecessors that were, you know, leading the world at the time, they should have kept an eye on that. But I do think socialism overall has many successes that we look at today and we're trying to learn from. I mean, we're still trying to figure out how to implement these resources into our current economy because we're dealing with a beast of multimillionaires, multi-billionaires. I mean, Elon Musk, there's a headline that just came out today saying that he makes more money than every single teacher in the country. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
there's something going on like we have to fix in here, and we have to go look at other countries for results.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I wanted to just, you made me think of an experience that I had back in the 90s. I was doing work in Florida, and I worked with um, the Haitian community and the Cuban community in healthcare in Florida. And the Haitian community and the Cuban community all had beefs, because of just the propaganda around each country. But what we did was we had them do research on each of their countries. Had the Haitians go back and do some research on Haiti. Why was Haiti so poor? Why did Haiti not have a healthcare system? Blah 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 blah. And then we did the same thing with Cuba. And why did Cuba have a healthcare system that a lot of people from the United States go to get healthcare? Why was Cuba able, to be in the position that they were in versus Haiti? And what they found was that up until the time of the Cuban Revolution, when both Cuba and Haiti were colonies of an imperialist country, they were basically at the same economic position. But once Cuba overthrew its colonizer and Haiti didn't, Cuba was able to advance, to the point where its people were able to feed themselves and house themselves and educate themselves and build up this 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 wonderful medical community. And think about this: Cuba were able to help African countries with their liberation struggles, as a result of lifting up that yoke of colonization on them. That to me is a practical difference between what socialist organizing of the economy would do versus the capitalist organizing of the economy. Still capitalism in Haiti, but socialism in Cuba. I think it would make a lot of sense for people to investigate situations like that when they're thinking about what socialism can do for a country.
Mm. Any other questions? We got about 12 minutes left. If there's any more.
Yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead, Matthew.
Yeah, I think the guy who was talking earlier, he kind of missed my point. I don't think he understood maybe.
Mhm.
I was giving examples of history when, because we can talk about ideologies all day. We can sit here and hypothesize and dream and blissfully ignore kind of what happened throughout history. Another example, you had East Germany and West Germany. One was socialist, one was capitalist. When Germany reunited, everybody wanted to get out of East Germany. Everybody flooded to West Germany. So if we can't, because history repeats itself, right? That's how the saying goes, right? It's doomed to repeat itself. So I feel like if we don't learn from our lessons of history and we just kind of, hypothesize and presume and assume, then I don't think we're really gonna get anywhere, unfortunately.
So let me try to take a stab at this. So I think one that history is a constant arc, and we never return to a previous place per se. And I think that if we're talking about real concrete conditions of living human beings, we can look at the United States as perhaps the wealthiest country on the face of the earth, and yet we have growing poverty, growing houselessness, growing hunger, and we have a government that is coming into the street to just torment and violently attack our people. That is not because of socialism. That is because of capitalism. And I think that while history is very important and we can look at exactly what was going on, I mean, Jerome already spoke to the need of countries in the post-World War II period who were trying to move towards socialism. And that's something we haven't mentioned, that socialism is a process, the development of it, as is the development of communism. And capitalism is always in process. So it seems that it's important to understand what were the attacks on countries that were trying to transition, and then how were capitalist countries organizing and treating and creating conditions of life for their own people. I come from the South. We haven't talked about the importance of the Southern question, but if you want to look at poverty rates in this country, Black, white, immigrant, the South has the largest concentration of low income and impoverished working class people. And that has been a consistent thing throughout the history of this country, from chattel slavery all the way up to the current moment. So I just think that this requires a real concrete scientific understanding and analysis that, I mean, I'm glad we're starting the conversation, but it's going to take a lot more data, a lot more, you know, real granular information to be able to make these assessments. And the other thing is, what's the motion? What is the motion within capitalist countries? Look at Sudan, look at Congo, you know, look at, you know, many of the countries that have been colonized by capitalism and imperialism, and they're still suffering those consequences. So, you know, it's a big question. It's a big global question. And it brings up the need for revolutionary research and education.
Hi, thank you. Matthew, I understood the point that you were making. I was just highlighting the the socialist countries that historically have been very successful. I mean, let's look at Cuba. It's under the strictest economic embargo that any country in the world has ever faced, but yet has universal health care, a free education system. And a lot of people that go to Cuba to this day love their experience there. And I do want to touch on East Germany because I am very historically like filtered. I know the history of East Germany. East Germany, their issue wasn't necessarily the fact that they were socialism. It was actually the fact that Erich Honecker was an authoritarian leader and it was a totalitarian state. He had human rights violations up the wall, and the reason they had to unify was that they were actually trying to capture him, and then he fled to Chile when he fled through like Russia. It's you can look more into that specifically. But yeah, that their failure wasn't necessarily in the fact that in their socialist prospect. It was the fact that they were authoritarian. Um I will say that also goes into the leverage of socialism. Socialism is an economic plan of sorts. Like that would be the best way to establish it. But it has to be paired up with a governing system that allows it to flourish. If you look at a lot of the many successful countries, there is a mix of democracy with socialist plans and socialist agreements that have led to their success. I know, like historically, a lot of other, let's say, communist, they're under that label. Some of them actually weren't very communist at all, but a lot of these countries not only had authoritarian leaders that disturbed their process at the time, but also a lot of other socialist countries historically haven't fell without Western intervention. That is another thing. A lot of other socialist countries that have turned out bad have had extreme foreign intervention that have led to their failure.
Thank you. Any other
And just to
questions?
say, I just want to say that this is a big question. And I hope that y'all in class continue this discussion because it's critical for us to understand, what's arising and developing and what's deteriorating away. Because if you look at what's happening with China and what's happening in the United States today, the United States is creating more and more people in poverty, and China is creating more and more people out of poverty. One is a socialist economy struggling toward communism, and the other one is a dying capitalist society. So, I hope y'all continue this conversation because it requires a big conversation, and this is just the beginning of it.
Yeah, very good. All right. I think that was a really good conversation. We have 5 minutes left. Like we said, you can get the. Do you want to you have a question in the back? So, the book is available at Barbara's Bookstore or Macy's, which is just like 2 blocks down that way. I encourage you to get it. And just want to give them a round of applause because this was a really good conversation, and I really appreciate the students who spoke up. Thank you so much. This was really good. And
Thank you for
I always
having
tell.
us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Getting lots of applause. We had about 20 people in the audience today.
Right.
Just want to say thank you for coming to Harold, Washington. Think of this as your second home, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you so much.
All
Thank you,
righty.
participants.
Y'all
All
take
right.
care.
Take
Thank
care,
you.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.